Hello everyone, and welcome to This Nintendo Life episode 121. It's a palindrome, just like my real name. But Bally, do you have a palindrome that you like the most out of palindromes?
Mawam.
Mawam. Oh, right, yeah, that's the one that you said was a palindrome. I'm like, wait a second, I can't remember. I couldn't realise that was one at the time, so there you go. It's fantastic. Anyway, this is a podcast about Nintendo and video games and not Mawams, although we could do a podcast about Mawams. I'm not sure how long that would last.
Do they have Mawam in the States? I don't know how big Haribo is in the States.
No, I'm pretty sure it's like a worldwide brand, so it probably does, exist to some extent. But anyway, we're here. We're ready to talk about some video games and some things. Of course, we have our Backlog Club for Punch-Out on Wii coming up later in the show. But otherwise, we're just going to be having a nice little show here and talking about some games. Bally, what are we going to be doing today?
Yes, as you said, a two-segment show. First segment, what we've been playing, and then second segment, which Backlog Club is this? I think it's our sixth, maybe?
Fifth, perhaps?
Fifth? Yeah, it might be fifth. So yeah, Punch-Out on Wii. We've got lots to talk about with that game.
Absolutely. Hopefully you all have played along and enjoyed as well. But before we get into that, we're going to talk about some other video games, what we've been playing the last couple of weeks. Bally, how about you kick us off?
First of all, I finished up Celeste. Literally just beat it a little bit before recording just now.
Mm-hmm.
I just think the message in that story and the way that it concludes and everything to do with that just goes way above and beyond what that game would normally, what a 2D platformer would normally do when it comes to story. And I think that just for that message alone, not alone, I like so many great things about this game, but I just really pray that when it comes to Game of the Year discussions amongst other podcasts and outlets, that just because it's a 2D platformer that came out way back in January, that it doesn't get forgotten about, and that this deserves to be up there with the big AAAs that obviously get so much attention and love.
And it's a hard year for that, right? Because the end of this year we have things like Spider-Man and we have Red Dead Redemption 2 and, there's Dragon Quest coming out, which, is probably going to be overlooked by a lot of people, but it's still considered a big game. There are a lot of big games, and I do find a lot of the time, and it's changed in recent years, but
stuff like Cuphead helped that, but it stood out so much because of its art style, and
right.
I hope that Celeste can stand out because of its story and what it does for that genre.
Yeah, definitely. It is one of those things that I think a lot of people will be like, yeah, Celeste was really good, but God of War, and they're gonna look at God of War because it has prestige and because it's big and because it just demands a lot of attention. And for me, it's difficult because I think that both games are really fantastic and they're both up there for me. But Celeste is kind of head and shoulders above God of War.
They're incredibly hard games to compare, but I just hope that they actually are compared, and it's not just obviously God of War is better because it's God of War at the end of the year, and that Celeste doesn't get short shrift. I actually thought the last few levels of this game were quite a bit more challenging than the start of the game, and that was great. And
the last chapter in particular is very long. I actually watched the speedrun for this during SGDQ this year, and half of the speedrun is dedicated to that last chapter.
Wow.
Because it takes a huge amount of time.
I love that last chapter. As we mentioned quickly off mic, it's like a victory lap around all the previous levels, and it's just a great close to that game. I actually thought if you're comparing main games, this game was easier than Meat Boy in my view. It's hard to compare though, right? Because I think when it comes to Celeste, every room that you take on can be done in 30 seconds or less. And I wouldn't say that is true for some other games in the genre. Meat Boy especially, there are levels that go for at least a minute or a minute and a half, and you have to sustain a level of control over it for that amount of time, which I think makes it more difficult, right? Because if there's no checkpoints in between, no little kind of micro... Some of the levels are slightly longer, right?
Right, and I think that contributes to maybe it being more, quote, difficult, even if the challenges themselves, on a level like that, may not be.
Yeah. And I mean, if it wasn't for Octopath coming out in a week, I'd happily go through like most of these B-sides and trying to unlock more of the later levels and the eighth level, the eighth chapter, I should say, and things like that. That there's just so much coming out right now that I want to beat, that I'm scared I'm not going to go back to it right now. But I would like to try and do as much of that as I can before the end of the year, because this game just I had high expectations going in, but it really did meet those expectations.
I remember when you played it for like 5 minutes when I was with you in Brussels, and you're like, I need this now.
I need it. It's great. So, yeah, like I said, what it does and talks about anxiety and the messages it does, and the way that it visualizes anxiety and how it's done through another character and things like that. Like it's just so clever and executed so well, and the writing is very, very strong, and it's consistently good, and
it's funny as well. You know, it's a light-hearted game to some extent too. So I think that it balances that stuff really, really elegantly. And even in some of they are able to create some gameplay out of a thing that I didn't think they would be able to. So like the thing with the feather where it's kind of bouncing up and down is definitely one of those areas where like you could have visualized this without the player being in control, but having the player be in control is a way of getting across the message so much more strongly.
Absolutely. And this is actually the first game I've beaten this year that came out this year.
Wow.
So, we're in July now. So,
for Nintendo at least, I guess.
So lots of there's lots of other games that have come out on Switch this year that I've played, but they weren't sort of original games on Switch. They're ports and things. So,
wait a second. No, you've beaten Runner 3 and God of War. So
Runner 3 and God of War. Yeah, good point. Good point.
I think we're all just forgetting like what has come out this year.
I think I had in my mind that this was the first just because it came out at the start of the year. Anyway.
Oh, right, because it was January.
It's the third game that I've played this year that came out this year.
There you go.
Talking of another game that's coming out this year that I'm 3 hours into because of its prologue demo. It's Octopath Traveler. I'm not going to go super in depth because we are going to talk a lot about this game when it comes out later this week, and it'll probably take us quite a few shows to wade through.
Yeah, I don't know how long it is. People are probably expecting it to be a large RPG, so we shall see.
Right. So I started the demo, and it's basically the main game. Some areas are sort of blocked off to make sure that you don't explore chapters beyond the realm of what they want you to explore, essentially. So you can start as any of the 8 characters, and fun little tidbit I found out on the internet is that whichever character you start as has to stay in your party, and that's what people who are even 20 hours into the game who have preview copies are already saying. So top tip, you maybe want to think about that depending on who you want to start with. I started with the hunter Hannet, and she's basically a archer cross axe wielder and is a bit high defense, high attack, that sort of stat. We've already talked a lot about the production value of this game, but going into like a new character's story arc and seeing how that they're all going to link up was very interesting. I have some concerns, and others are sharing these concerns from what I've read online, and one of the concerns is that you start in one town as a character, and then you go to the next town, and without any interaction, you basically walk up to the next character, and then you play their prologue chapter, or like their chapter 1. So it feels initially very disconnected. You're just doing 2 chapter 1s, and the chapter
that was one of the things from the original demo where I was like, you take Ulbrich to Primrose and they don't even talk to each other at all. Like one of them just joins the party,
right?
And it's a little weird in that sense, because it's like, where's the context for any of this? Like, why are these people together? What is the reason for them to join up? And it seems like because they're all focusing on their individual stories, it's kind of like maybe Breath of the Wild in the sense that it wants to be non-linear, and so the storytelling may suffer as a result in terms of linking things together, because they just don't know who you're going to start with and where you're going to go.
There are some things that are reassuring, though. Some people who have moved on to some chapter 2s who have played previews, they say they do start interacting a bit more in chapter 2s. but you might not play any chapter 2s until you've been through all 8 characters, and all 8 characters, each prologue or chapter 1 takes maybe an hour and a half, maybe even 2 hours for some of them. And so I did the chapter 1 of the 2 characters I played as, which are Hannet and Ophelia. Ophelia's the one of the clerics, and Hannet's the hunter, like I said.
Right.
So I had a good combo. I just got lucky, and I think that the map's arranged in a way where I guess the 2 clerics are on opposite ends, and the sort of hunter style characters opposite ends. So if you go to the character next door to your character, you're likely to get someone that will complement your party rather than harm it. It's how it feels. It's strange though, because what I was saying about it being reassuring is that yes, there are more character interactions in chapter 2. And also, developers that were for the game who were interviewed at E3 made clear that there is like an overarching link to all of these things, and that they are. It's not just 8 individual stories told in a nice cutesy way.
Right.
As great as that might be to some people, I think that me personally, I love the idea that there's going to be an overarching thing. So,
have you felt to any extent that this game has a feel like Final Fantasy VI? Because that's one of the things that was coming out of interviews as well, is the director was like, if Bravely Default was calling back to Final Fantasy V, then Octopath Traveler is calling back to Final Fantasy VI. And when I think back on Final Fantasy VI, I do think of how many individual characters there were, and they did link together, but it was, I think, like, especially at the start where you're split up with Sabin goes on his little adventure and you have Terra on hers and you have Locke on his adventure, they get split up a lot and they're kind of going on their different paths, and then they eventually come back together. And I wonder how that would fit in with this game.
Yeah, and early on, it doesn't feel much like it, in the sense that early on in Final Fantasy, there's a lot of character interactions.
Yeah, and it maybe feels like the second half in that sense.
Yeah, it does. It definitely, like,
because when that happens, like, I remember when you get Locke back in your party, it feels like they don't make a big deal of it. He just kind of joins and is like, "Oh, you're back together again," and that makes more sense there, right? Because they already had a pre-existing relationship. But yeah, I guess the non-linearity makes me think of the second half of that game more so.
And as non-linear as this is, it's still, I have a very mild concern that it's almost JRPG by numbers. And what I mean by that is, the second you open up your map, I could already see where Hannet's chapter 2 took place, like on the map. It's like, all right, it's there. And then the chapter 1 for this Ophelia, the next character I saw, was here. And then the next one was here. And it's like, I could see clearly on the map when the next chapter for each character was, just by opening up my map. And so to some degree, the sense of mystery and exploration you might want in a JRPG might be cut back a bit, but at the same time, the ease of play and knowing where to go next is quite satisfying to play through so far. So like, it's, I think that the 2 characters I've had, both their stories are pretty strong ones from what I've seen so far. The voice acting it's hammy and suits the style, I think. Like, it's like, I'm the gruff old wise person. I talk like this. It's like, and I'm the
cute fairy anime girl
in this. I've got a high pitched voice and I talk like this. And it's like, right, okay, we get it. Like, there's just really tropey things going on, and it works fine. Like, I don't think it's not a real criticism of the game. I think it makes everything feel a bit more fairy tale, I guess, and that's kind of what this is. Like, traditional fantasy, this world is definitely based in. There's nothing sort of steampunkish about it so far, which is a take, and I think it's working well. So yeah, I the second the 3 hours were up, I was like, I am ready to go for next Friday, because definitely it's very, very exciting, and I'm loving the battle mechanics. I think the idea, like the traditional JRPGs like Final Fantasy VI, is like, you attack, and then they attack, and then you attack, and then they attack. Whereas this idea of like charging up and having extra attacks you can spend and defend, and it just adds a layer of strategy to that model where so many modern JRPGs are shifting into that sort of action framework of, like, I guess, the MMO style, like, to some degree, and stuff like Xenoblade, I guess, to go back to and reinvent that turn-based formula is really exciting. So, yeah.
I think like they are taking some things they did in the Bravely Default games as well, because the whole reason it was called Bravely Default is because you had the Brave system where you could, I think, bank up attacks or do multiple attacks in a row. So like if you were taking on a weaker enemy, you could do like 6 attacks in a row, but then you wouldn't be able to attack for 6 turns. But the thing with that is if it's a weaker enemy, you just kill them straight away. So it's like the tactics of that being pared down into a system that's maybe a bit more streamlined.
Yeah.
It's
awesome
cool
as well, because you can charge up any move. You can charge up to just defend, and like that's really good for when you're fighting a boss, say, that has their own charge up attack that's going to do a ton of damage. And if you've got a fully charged defend, I saw a preview doing this where you only take 1 damage, like from the full on charged attack from the boss. So, and you can charge up stuff like clerics healing moves and stuff for your party. And they'll man, that's really cool. And then also, for your basic moves, it's number of attacks. And then for your special moves, it's just a more powerful attack. So
right, okay.
It's really cool the way that the shields work on the enemies and... like
breaking them, basically.
The easiest strategy that I've been utilizing, that I've seen others talking about online, is that you basically do 1 standard attack per turn. And as long as you're only doing a standard attack, you will also charge one of your extra attacks. So you do a standard attack, knock down the shield a bit, charge up a bit. Do a standard attack, knock down the shield, charge up. Eventually their shield will break, they will be stunned, and then you've got this fully charged attack. You can just wail on them while they're in stun mode and do a ton of damage. And that's basically the basics of how you take out big bosses.
Weirdly reminds me of Final Fantasy 13, because in that game there's this whole idea of staggering the enemy, and so you use a bunch of like magic to weak attacks to raise this stagger gauge, and then once that is raised up, then you just attack them with your like physical attacks. So it feels maybe similar to that extent, but obviously very different because it's turn based. And
coming out on Friday. I'm going away for a week, so have lots of time to play it.
That's a good time to dive into that game, for sure.
To it,
before we stop talking about it, how has the soundtrack been so far? Because that again is one of those things that I am most excited about.
Unbelievable! Like I'm just listening to all of the music online, like constantly. And I think the best theme tune so far is Primrose's theme. So
I agree. That's the one that was the strongest.
Yeah, she was one of the characters in the first demo, and I've specifically avoided Albrook and Primrose at the start of this game just to experience some new characters. And I must say, Ophelia's the city that Ophelia is from is the most beautiful thing I think I might have ever seen in a JRPG. It is stunning how good that town looks. It's like a cathedral in the snow, and it's beyond. I can't even get my head around how good it looks. So yeah,
wow. Awesome.
Talk about production values. This game blows out of the park, and we'll see.
I'm very
how the
excited.
Story holds up.
I think I'm going to be starting it later this week. I've got a 3-day weekend coming up for it as well.
Are you going to avoid the characters I've seen and go for your own thing?
Yeah, I think I will now, just for the difference of opinion. But definitely fantastic. Cool. Well, that sounds awesome. I am very excited for it. A couple of things that I have been playing. So after E3, or like during E3, they announced this kind of prequel to Life is Strange 2. Life is Strange, obviously the narrative adventure game from Don't Nod, that lots of people are a big fan of. I never played it, but I did watch playthroughs of it. I watched playthroughs of the first game and also the prequel game Before the Storm. And it's one of those games I'm like, I guess I could play this game, but also I like the people who I was watching. It was Dodger and Jesse Cox. They basically go through them together, and I just enjoyed watching their playthroughs. But I am someone who has liked playing Telltale games in the past. So because this game, Captain Spirit, was free, I was like, well, I might as well just download it and go through it myself to see how it is. And it's only a couple of hours long, but it tells the story of this relationship between this very young boy and his dad, who kind of fallen into alcoholism and is just not a very nice person, but also you feel sympathy for him. It's very weird. It's also because like the mother has passed away, and so it's just a very kind of rough situation, and the boy is still very young. He's like maybe 8 or 9 years old, and so he has this sense of wonder about the world still, while being in a situation that is not very ideal for him, and it's very short, but it tells a pretty compelling story throughout. I don't think the writing is amazing all the way through. I think this is maybe Don't Nod's problem sometimes, is they had trouble, especially in the beginning of Life is Strange, of like writing teenagers, and so writing kids is maybe a little tricky on their end, but they do. I think they've gotten better at it, and it's not perfect, but they are kind of in a place now where I think going forward they're going to just keep improving on that stuff. And so the structure of it is you're in this house, and he is the kid who's called Chris has, you know, he's like a lot of kids, has made up this superhero persona for himself, who's called Captain Spirit. And so around the house you're like going around to try and find parts of your costume. At the start you basically make a decision to like draw your costume, and you can use a helmet or a mask, or you can do heavy armor on him or light armor, and there's this drawing that you have, and so that kind of influences what your costume looks like while you're going around the house trying to find it. And you have all these other little things as well. There are moments where his imagination goes wild, and so he needs to go and turn on, I think it's the water heater. But when he enters the room, it's like this dark, kind of mysterious atmosphere, and you kind of see his mind's eye imagination of this giant, like, water monster that he has to defeat. And he goes up to it and, like, starts doing some magic on it or some superhero powers, and then it, like, cuts to, like, a click, and he's just clicked it off on the wall, and you're just back into reality. So it does a lot of that switching between the imagination and real life quite well. But I think one of the most interesting things that the game does is, at the very start of the game, you're in the bedroom, and there are a lot of things to look at. So, you know, you interact with the environment, you look around all the things in his room, and while you're looking at it, your dad is calling you for breakfast. And I was just like, yeah, whatever, he's calling me for breakfast. So I just kept looking around the room, because I'm trying to be a completionist here. I just want to see every single object. And after a little while, he calls me again, a little bit angrier. But I keep going, and I still keep doing it. And I'm thinking to myself, I wonder if this is having an effect. If the fact that I, as the player, wanting to be a completionist here and look at everything in this room, is having the effect that I should be like, no, I shouldn't do this because my dad's calling me and he's being angry right now. But I just kept going, and I just kept going. And eventually he was just like full on shouting at me to come out of my room. And so I did, and he was just incredibly angry and like not in a good mood. And then that kind of set the table for like the conversation after that. But then I watched the start of the Let's Play that Jesse and Dodger were doing, and they basically went out as soon as he had called them, and he responded completely differently. And cool. I was like, that is a very cool way of making this feel less like a video game and feel more like something in which the characters are conscious and are reacting to the situations around them, right? Like the dad is wanting you to come downstairs. Like we all have that experience of our parents being like, come down for dinner, and you're like, no, I'm doing something. And I think that worked particularly effectively. I thought that was very smart. The other thing that they do is in terms of incidental dialogue. So sometimes in these games when you're walking around, you'll hear characters like say something in the background, and what they do in this game is they allow you to respond to that. So it's not just choosing dialogue options while you're inside of a cutscene where you're just, you know, you don't have control aside from saying what you want to say. You are just walking around the environment, and you can have the option to respond or not respond. You can just leave it and let it go by, and then that will elicit a different response. But I thought it was interesting to throw that into the mix and to make it a bit more interactive in terms of the dialogue stuff, outside of just kind of being pigeonholed into the cutscenes. And you can kind of end it whenever you want. Like you can go around and do everything. I accidentally ended it before having done everything, so I went back in and did a few of the other things around the house that you could do. But I think it's a really good way to get people on board for Life is Strange 2, because I think it's probably going to be following these characters, and it may be a skip forward in time. I don't know what it's going to be, but there is a twist at the end, and you're like, oh, okay. So I am interested to see where it goes, and I think I'm more likely now to pick up Life is Strange 2 and play it for myself, as opposed to maybe watching it, because I thought they did some really interesting stuff. And it's free on PS4, Xbox One, and on PC. So
and
there's
it's
no
like
reason
an
to...
intro or a chapter? Or...
Yeah, I guess it's... I mean, they call it a demo. It is a standalone game. Like, there is a full arc that you go through.
And how long is that arc?
It's like 2 hours.
Okay.
So it is very short, and you can get through it pretty easily. But I'd recommend it. I say it's a very interesting little thing that people can play. The other thing that I played is, so during E3 they showed Devil May Cry 5 at the Xbox conference. I was like, that looks pretty cool. And having been into Bayonetta on the Wii U, being more accepting maybe now to these over-the-top action games, I was like, you know what? I've never played a Devil May Cry game before. And recently Twitch have been doing crazy things where just giving away loads of games on Twitch Prime, if you have that. This month in particular, it's like every day there's a new game. Recently I was thinking about buying Battle Chef Brigade on Switch, but then they were like, oh no, it's just free on PC. I'm like, okay, well, I guess I'm not buying that on Switch anymore because I just own it now. And so one of the games that they had been giving away was Devil May Cry HD, because they put out an HD collection for Devil May Cry, I think originally on the PlayStation 3 and Xbox 360, but now they brought it over to newer hardware. And the HD collection has all 3 games in it, but what they were doing on Twitch was they were only giving away the first game, because I think that's an incentive for you to go ahead and buy the other 2 games from their store, because that's how they make their money, I guess. But I just wanted to play the first one. And so this is a very weird game in a lot of ways. I always thought that this genre was about spectacle and about combos and all that stuff, but the original Devil May Cry is so strangely structured. Apparently it started out life as a Resident Evil game, and there are a lot of hallmarks of that series that you can kind of see in this. I think the major one is the fixed camera angles. So your camera stick doesn't do anything. You can't move around Dante or see anything, because every time you move through a room, it will shift the camera to a different perspective, whether it's like kind of an angle to the side, or really high up looking down kind of isometrically, or just standard behind the back. And it will happen not just when you're moving from room to room, but within rooms. So if you're going round a corner, you'll maybe see yourself moving towards the camera, and then it will just randomly cut, and now you'll be facing the other way and walking. And it's one of those things where it's like, if you're holding the analog stick forward, it will keep moving in the direction you were moving, but if you move it again, you'll get a bit disoriented, and you're like, oh no, which way was I going? Oh no, and I'm back and forward. So in this day and age, I don't think the camera stuff works particularly well. I think Resident Evil it works for, because that's more of a slow, atmospheric game. But in a game about action and slicing things up and shooting things, it doesn't really make a lot of sense. So that was something I was kind of like confused by. It's like it's very much a relic of the time of like the PS2 era. So that was one of the interesting things. And the other interesting thing is the entire game takes place on this island, and you're exploring this castle. The story is very, very generic. There's an evil guy, you got to kill him, blah, blah, blah.
I was going to say, what's the story of Devil May Cry?
Who fucking knows? There's a girl called Trish who like comes into you own this like agency, and you're the descendant of this ancient warrior called Sparda, right? And Dante, so that's Dante, and he is the son of Sparda. And then this girl Trish comes into your agency, she stabs you through the chest, and you're like, wait a second, you can't kill me because like I have devil's blood in me or some shit. And then she's like, oh, you're cool, let's go on a motorbike and go to this island. So they go to this island, and then you don't see her for like most of the game, and then you're like, oh, I love you, Trish. And it's like, this is a very PS2 era of like, that. Where did that relationship come from? You literally have talked to this woman twice. It's very stupid. So that's basically the setup for Devil May Cry. But yeah, it's not really about that, right? Because it is about getting through this castle and fighting enemies as you go, and it's quite a difficult game. So as soon as the option popped up for me to switch to easy mode, which like after there's this one boss that you fight, this spider boss, and I died on it a bunch of times, and it was like, hey, do you want to go easy mode? I was like, yes, please, thank you. Because I'm not really here for the combos and the learning moves and doing the kind of stylish stuff that these games are known for. I'm more here to just experience this as a historical thing, I guess, and see what it's about and see the weirdness of it. And so that's what I did pretty much straight away. But the weird thing about it is it's broken into missions, but the missions aren't like they don't have a beginning, middle, or end to them like you would in a Bayonetta, right? It's not set up as like you're in this one area, then we're going to go to the next weird area, and we're just going to kind of flow from place to place. You're in the same castle the whole time, and there are puzzle-esque elements to where there are doors that are locked that you're going to have to go find a key for, or there's an object that will activate a thing that you will then be able to move on with. And sometimes you'll get the object in one mission, and then in the next mission you'll still have it, and you'll use it on a door that previously you couldn't go back to. So it has a Metroid-style exploration thing to it, but because it's broken into missions, it's very linear. So you have a set path that you're going down, despite the fact that it has those ideas. So again, like the Resident Evil DNA is kind of showing, but then they shoved in a mission structure to it. So, and sometimes the missions are like 3 minutes long, sometimes they're like 20 minutes long, so it's very inconsistent, and it's just not what I expected out of the game, right? Because you think about Devil May Cry and you just think it's an action game where you are just going through a bunch of enemies and stuff and level to level, but this did definitely feel like this mashup of things that they hadn't really figured out yet. They just didn't know what the genre would be, because I think that this is kind of the start of that more character action based thing. I don't know how many games came before.
So this was before God of War then?
I don't know. I feel like they were around a similar era. But yeah, this game is directed by Hideki Kamiya, who is the guy who did Bayonetta. Cool. Yeah, it definitely has that style to it. But that is the main thing about this game, is it's all about style. The most iconic thing from Devil May Cry, I think, is Dante in mid-air shooting pistols, and the momentum from the pistol just basically makes it so he's floating in mid-air. And that is one of the coolest things that you do in this game. It's like you're just jumping in the air and you're just like shooting pistols as you're like floating there. And it just looks awesome. It looks very cool. I didn't stick with the pistols too much because you get like a shotgun, which I really enjoyed, and you get like a grenade gun later on, which was really powerful. So there was definitely... There's a mixture of weapons and things that I was kind of messing around with, that I was having fun with. But yeah, I don't know. It's just a strange game. There's also a lot of repeated bosses, which is something I don't expect from something like this. I thought, it's all about the spectacle and stuff. But again, this is the first game in the series, so they're figuring a lot of stuff out. I'm glad I played it because I think it's very interesting from a historical standpoint, and just knowing what that series is and where it's been and where it's come from. But yeah, I don't know. It's weird. I liked it. Also, there were parts that I found frustrating and annoying, but I'm glad that I know what Devil May Cry is now, and so I have better context at least for when 5 comes out, and maybe I'll play that. But yeah, that is pretty much that. I think that we're going to take a break now, and we will come back after that with Punch-Out and talking about all the things that make that game. So we'll be back in a bit. Alright everyone, welcome back to the second half of the show, in which we're going to be talking about our next Backlog Club game, Punch-Out for the Wii.
Our 5th Backlog Club.
Yeah, It's been, I don't know how long since we started doing these, but we are trying to be a bit more frequent with them.
Well, that's our fifth, and it's our 121st episode, so
yeah, so it's
we
like
could
one
probably
every
be a bit
20.
better than we've been.
Potentially. But yeah, I'm going to try and be more frequent. I think the trouble is like when we choose a giant game like Final Fantasy VI.
We play 2 JRPGs back to back.
Exactly, yeah.
Final Fantasy VI.
And then everyone's like, oh, do Golden Sun. I'm like, oh god, another JRPG. It's like, yeah, that's a thing. But yeah, I'm sure there are a lot of other smaller games that we can do that will lend to the format a bit more and make it a bit easier to play alongside playing other stuff as well. So let's kick it off then with what we know about Punch-Out, how much we have interacted with Punch-Out in the past, and what Punch-Out means to us. Bally, what's your familiarity with Punch-Out before getting to this Wii game?
I was aware of it, but never played it. And I knew that there was an NES version and a Super Nintendo version, and that they were very hard games, and that there was a lot of stereotypes in those games, so they were maybe a bit controversial. And for a long time, I didn't even know that the Wii version existed. It came out at a time, and we'll get into when it comes out, but it came out at a time when I was very switched off from sort of all the news and new games that were coming out at the time. Yeah,
I think I remember seeing it maybe in magazines, but maybe it was at a time past when I was even looking at that stuff. And again, like during the Wii era, there were less games directed at people like us, even though we were maybe not playing a lot of those games back then either. Like we were very much into, still doing a lot of Guitar Hero and playing Mario Kart and things like that. So it was a series that I had known about, but was never really interested in or didn't really know a lot about. And so when the Wii game came out, it wasn't something that I was immediately drawn to or was like, oh, this is this thing that has been brought back. As over the years, as I kind of learned more about, the history of the series and all the kind of games that had existed and listening to people talk about the Wii game on podcasts before, it became more interesting to me. I think it became more interesting because the original NES game, I now look at it and I'm like, oh, actually, I would like to play that. But a while ago, I was like, I don't know, I'm not sure that looks like something I'd be interested in. And the polish and sheen that they put on this game in terms of the art style and just the way it looks is something that had drawn me towards it in the past. But it is a game that was developed by Next Level Games, one of those developers that we really like. Obviously, you played a lot of the Mario football stuff, which came out in the day.
And Luigi's Mansion 2.
Yes.
Can't think what else have they worked on. Or
Federation Force, of course.
Federation Force.
Infamously.
How could I forget?
Yeah.
We don't know what they're working on currently, do we?
No idea. So. Hopefully it's something good. But Next Level are a company who have really been tasked with reviving Nintendo IP in the last few iterations of what they've done. And, obviously Federation Force has a huge faction of people who hate it, having never played it. And it's one of those games that I think didn't review amazingly well either. And I think there are people who like it, but again, it feels like one of the weaker games that Next Level have made, and it was an attempt to be like, oh, Metroid is kind of back, but not really. Whereas I think their other two iterations of that being Punch-Out Wii and Luigi's Mansion 2 were far more successful and accepted by people. And I think that Punch-Out Wii is pretty much a tremendous success in terms of taking this old idea, bringing it to a more modern format and making it accessible. And I was very impressed by it for kind of those reasons. How did you feel about Punch-Out Wii overall, Bally?
I wasn't expecting to like it a whole lot, to be honest. I thought, right, it's you punch dudes. That's about it. How do they keep that interesting for more than 45 minutes? And how do they mix it up? And how will they engage me? And I think that it's how solid those mechanics are, and how like exciting the people you're fighting against are. Like,
right,
we can get onto the characters in a while, but it's really quirky and zany, like some of the people you're fighting, and it's ultimately just bosses.
Yes, it's a boss fight game. It's basically Shadow of the Colossus, you know? Like,
It's just boss
one
fights,
after the
exactly.
other.
And it works so well for this game. There's no gameplay outside of just fighting another dude, and that's really rare in video games these days. And it's
kind of bold, isn't it, as well?
Yeah.
Because you look at the original Punch-Out, and nowadays, if you were to make a game like that, I feel like in the AAA space, people would be like, well, where's the multiplayer online mode? And where's the kind of, where's the zombies Punch-Out where I punch the zombies? And where's my, like, single-player cinematic campaign and things like that? Like, people want so much from games these days that to take an idea that was as simple and as pared down as the original Punch-Out and to basically do the same thing again, albeit more polished and more well-designed.
They've really kept the simplicity of that original idea. And you say, like, where's the story mode? There's still, like, the little not screenshots, but like a slideshow, I guess, of character interactions that not interactions, but like flavor stuff that happens in this game between fights that kind of give you an idea of who the people you're fighting are and where they come from and that sort of thing that just adds to how interesting it is to fight some of these people from around the world.
Definitely. But yeah, it's pretty bold to have a full price game that's like, no, you just fight these guys and that is pretty much all you do. And I think it is an idea that more people should try and, like, if you have one thing that you know is working and you know is good, you should focus on doing that as opposed to, you know, adding in extra things. I think this will come up in an email later, but it's also something that I thought about is when Cuphead was unveiled for the first time and it was just boss fights, the reaction of the community who were really excited about it was, well, that's cool, but how about if you added platforming levels as well? How about we have this extra element in there which we think, as people who want to play the game, is going to be better? As someone who played Cuphead and who thought the platforming levels were actually pretty good, they didn't need to be in there. You know, it was extraneous. It wasn't necessary. You didn't need to pad out that game with that stuff because the core idea and the bosses of that game were enough. They were the thing that were the driving force, and that is, I think, what they should have focused on more of, because in the end, if they had had the resources and taken away from those platforming levels and put towards maybe 2 or 3 extra bosses, I think it actually would have been a stronger package.
Like every game has to be a 12, 15-hour game no matter what these days. And it's just, if you can make that 5, 6, 7-hour game that is really good and really lean, there is a market for that. And I don't believe this game sold particularly well, but I mean, it is a very, very solid 6 to 7 hour game, and it can be done.
And it can also be extended. You know, there are things to do after you finish it. There is the title defense campaign. There is like a crazy, even harder thing with even more bosses. And Punch-Out is one of those games back in the day that was known for its challenge. And I think that they wanted to keep the spirit of that here. So for people who are getting this, they aren't necessarily like, if they want to just do the main campaign and be done, that's fine, but also you have the level of challenge there that you maybe wanted from the original campaign, that it's easier than the first Punch-Out for sure. Like, if you're not fighting someone as ridiculous as Mike Tyson, and as someone who watched Dan Reichert like play that fight, it seemed very, very challenging and very difficult. And so, yeah, it's definitely really cool to see that they added a bunch of stuff for the types of people who wanted that classic Punch-Out experience as well, and just to make it even more difficult than it was already. So yeah, overall we have the 3 kind of, I guess, title bouts. I can't remember what they're called. Are they done like heavyweight or lightweight like it is
I think they're just
wrestling?
Called minor, major, and world circuit.
Yeah, right. The league, right. They're kind of like the world circuits,
but
basically.
It's definitely fair to say that the guys on it get a lot bulkier as you go up.
Yeah, I guess. It is funny that, isn't it? Because Little Mac is just this tiny little guy, and majority of the boxers you face are just these enormous hulking like men that are just... in a real life you'd be like, oh god, this guy has literally no chance in hell. He's just going to be decimated, because just on a body structure level they're just dwarfing him. How did you find like the idea of going through the game in these kind of structured, like you're leading up to a title fight at the end, and kind of you see like the shadows of the boxes you have to face and stuff like that?
Yeah, it's good. I like the shadows. I like that each fighter is revealed individually, and you're like, right, this is the fighter I have to face, and it's really about getting into the mind of what that fighter has to throw at you, and you learn their moves, you learn exactly how to take them on, eventually beating them, and then you move on to a whole new set of moves that you have to learn again. And that gameplay loop is a very satisfying one, and you really feel a sense of accomplishment when you do beat one of them, because some of them you really have to learn every single move, and it's all about learning the tells and learning how to predict what move is going to come at you, because certain dodgers don't dodge all the moves, they dodge one move but not another move, and it's about matching up rock paper scissors. If you're going to do that punch, I'm going to do this dodge, that's how I'm going to, and every dodge you successfully do you can follow up with a few punches, and it's that progression that is very, it's a really strong gameplay loop and a very unique loop compared to almost all games I've played before.
Yeah, it's funny because when we were playing Contra 3 earlier this year, I think we had systems of when we were facing bosses, it would be like, okay, this phase we need to do this, and we need to learn this, and this is how we're going to get past this thing. But the problem with a game like Contra 3 is that there's no way to just be straight to the boss unless you did what we did and have save states, right? Like, because originally when you played that game, you have whole levels to go through and stages that you need to beat before you get to the boss, and then when you get to the boss, you only have a certain amount of time in order to learn it, to come up with strategies, and then to implement them. And I think I would compare Punch-Out in a sense to games like Super Meat Boy and Celeste because of the ability to just jump straight back into where you were. And the thing that I find is interesting is a lot of the time you have the opportunity to take them out over multiple rounds, but eventually as you get better and better, you know what they're doing, and you are like going through the first round without getting hit and stuff like this. You can take them all out in the first round if you are efficient enough and if you're effective enough. Or at least you can set them up at the end of the first round to where they have like a tiny bit of health when round 2 starts, and then from there you have like a full 3 minutes to knock them out twice more. And so it becomes a matter of efficiency and making sure that you are taking every opportunity to get them when you see the window of opportunity popping up. Yeah. What were some of the fights that you found most challenging, or the ones that you were kind of digging into a lot in the game?
I think both my favorite character and the toughest fight, maybe not the toughest fight, but one of the toughest fights I had was he's one of the World Circuit fighters, is Super Macho Man.
Yeah.
First of all, his character is just hilarious. He's like this tanned old guy from California, like Los Angeles, just lives a lifestyle of like being a celebrity, basically. He's got the white hair and a ponytail. And
yes.
He's just as arrogant as anything, and very, very stereotypical. We can get into more of that in a bit. But his moves, he's got this... His first round is very predictable. Like, he's got one punch where it's like a delay, and then the other side it's more instant. And then once you get beyond that, he's got a looping punch that is very hard. That you have to duck, basically. You can't dodge left or right. You have to duck it. And getting into that mindset of like knowing when the looping punch is coming, because the tell for the looping punch is actually really difficult to spot, and you kind of have to gamble on a lot of these dodges, and finding that dodge and then getting off your punches and eventually beating him was just a very satisfying process. It's hard. It's really hard to describe a game like Punch-Out where you're doing things in this game that you just wouldn't normally do in any other game, and you're not even doing very much. You're dodging and you're punching. That's it. That's all there is to this whole game. But it still has so many layers of intricacy and how to take on these opponents.
Right, because I think talking about the tells is interesting because what they do in this game is very smart. They have multiple ways in which you know that a certain move is coming out. The most obvious is the flashing red, right? Flashing red means, okay, here we go, you're about to be hit, so move out the way or get ready. But sometimes, they will move and they won't be flashing red, so that's when you know it's a delayed punch, is when they move to the side and then it takes a couple of seconds, then they flash red, then they hit you. So you have that. But the other one that I found really interesting was what they say.
Yeah.
So every move that they have will have either a little quip, or they will make a certain noise, or something that is audio-based, so that you could almost, and I would imagine this exists, that there would be blind speedruns or blind people, or people, blindfolding themselves playing Punch-Out, because you can use the audio in order to dodge out the way and know what move is coming. And that's just very smart. It allows you to have multiple opportunities to know that something is coming your way, and it starts out very obvious and very easy. I think one of the characters, Don Flamenco, does quite a big wind up before he punches. And so that one is very early on signaled to you, and so once you have that knowledge, you know that later on it's going to get more tough and the windows are going to get tighter, and so you're really listening out for the specifics of everything that they're saying, and that's why, like, later on I had to turn off like podcasts I was listening to while playing it, or not have YouTube videos on in the background, because I needed the focus of hearing them as well as kind of seeing the visual indication. I think a lot of that is down to just how good the animation is. Every fighter is so well characterized as being from a specific part of the world, and again, the racial stereotype stuff has been something that people have talked about for a long time with Punch-Out, and it's really weird when it comes to Nintendo, right? Because it doesn't feel like they are being malicious about it. It feels like they are much more taking the stance of over-the-top ridiculousness, and trying to make these characters stand out as characters, and I don't know how to feel about it, because it, to some extent, like the Indian guy with the turban and the flashing thing, feels very racist, but also I don't know, there's a personality to it that the animation brings out, and the way they carry themselves. It's difficult to talk about. I don't know. It's weird.
Yeah, I don't know how they would try and justify it, and it's certainly helped by the fact that it's lots of people of lots of ethnicities from across the world that they are basically making stereotypes of. For example,
they're not kind of going all in on one.
They're not going all in on one.
Equal opportunity, I guess.
Yeah, and there's multiple from the United States, for example.
Yes.
I'm personally devastated there's no one from Scotland in this game.
Yeah, I know. I was
sure that would
happen, but it didn't.
I don't know if this game would be the same if they didn't go for those stereotypes, and it's hard. You're right. It's very hard to describe and how I feel about it. And is it okay what they're doing, or is it beyond the red line? Maybe.
Yeah.
It's hard to describe. I think that the fact that they try to portray them all in around the same positive light, arguably, and they don't try to sort of over-characterize one nationality versus another. They're all just the biggest stereotypes of those nationalities, that they've almost got away with it. I don't know. Am I not being harsh enough, perhaps?
No, it's weird. It's definitely because, and it's even weirder now because of just the climate we are in versus even when this game came out. The back in whenever in the 80s when the original Punch-Out came out, like that was, no one would bat an eyelid at stuff like this. But yeah, I don't know, if they came out with a new Punch-Out, I think that would be a consideration they would have to make more now than they did back then, for sure. But again, like, they did tone stuff down. So for example, Soda Popinski used to be called Vodka Drunkinski,
Right.
So it was far more pointed, I guess, at Russian stereotypes than what they have done in this game. But there's other like stuff that is weirdly funny, like when you're punching Piston Honda, sushi like flies, egg sushi is like flying round his head, and it's just like, okay, this is just over the top in a way that kind of works. And I think it's also because of the art style, right? It's very cartoonish, and it's very bold and bright, and it has an air of fun around it that kind of helps to, you know, take the edge off that kind of stuff. It doesn't feel malicious, is the thing that I kind of...
You even got someone like King Hippo, who's just meant to be from like this made-up island in the Pacific, which was a bit unusual. I don't know. It's a bit strange.
Yeah, King Hippo is... so he's a very interesting fight, because I think that is the first fight in the game where I struggled.
Yeah.
It's where you're like, okay, I can't just punch anymore, because that's what I was doing. And maybe let's talk about the control scheme a little bit, because you can use motion controls with this game, and I don't know if you ever tried them out, Bally.
I didn't. Should I have?
I didn't either, so that's a thing we probably should have had a look at. But having played the game, I don't think motion controls would work particularly well. And I think it's because it's such a twitch kind of action. You have to... The
time it takes to swing a real punch versus press a button, and you can't. How can you argue that a motion controls would help?
Yeah, the timing windows are very, very small, and so it becomes a little bit difficult to maintain that when you are like moving your arm out and having it go in the right direction. And I don't know what you would need to do in terms of holding down a button to make you punch up or duck or stuff like that, or how they handle it. Probably analog stick on the nunchuck does a lot of that stuff, but yeah, it is a little weird when you look at the kind of sideways NES style for it, and it seems to work so perfectly. Just having the D-pad and having the two buttons, it's exactly the control scheme that you used in the original Punch-Out. And I think that's the other thing about this game, is it is very difficult, but it's also strangely approachable, you know? It just kind of works, and I feel like Punch-Out is one of those games that anyone can try and pick up and play, but to master it, you really have to have your wits about you, just knowing all the timings and where to punch and that stuff.
We could talk about the star punch and the star moves, I guess. I was learning new ways constantly throughout the game on how to gain stars. Right. Because there's more than one way. And originally, I thought the only way to gain a star was to punch them when they were basically doing their almost like a taunt, essentially. Yes,
they're kind of like, you know, making fun of you.
Yeah, they do like a taunt. If you punch them at the right time during the taunt, you get a star. But as I played more, I realized you can get stars for anticipating punch. You can counter a punch with a punch, and if you do it at the right time, you get a star. You also get a star if you can pull off enough. If the spacing between your multiple punches during a flurry is the right timing, you can get a star. So there's like all these different ways of getting stars, and I never got to the point where I charged up 3 stars, because obviously once you have a star and you get hit, you lose that star. So every time I was getting a star, I was using it as fast as possible just in case I got hit. It felt like the most economical way to do it. But did you find you were getting stars for like doing different things and like, attributing them to, I don't know, counter punches as well as attacking taunts?
So when I was struggling with some fights, I would go on to like wikis and be like, okay, how do I, you know, deal with this? How do I get the star punches? And it seems like every fighter has different ways that you can get star punches, so they're not necessarily consistent throughout.
Right.
But some fighters, you will be able to do a certain thing to get a star punch from them, and some, you know, that won't work because of the different mechanics that are at play. I think like the most obvious ones are obviously the ones that you talked about, the taunts, and there were some fighters where it was easier to get those star punches off. Even sometimes you would get it in that window and you wouldn't get it right enough that you would get the star punch. So sometimes you have to be very, very specific in terms of when you're doing it. But I think when it came to like learning new mechanics and figuring things out, it was very much a process of, oh, they have put up this specific barrier for me, and if I don't figure out what I need to do here, I'm not going to win this match. So the first one was with King Hippo, because you have to punch upwards, and I didn't realize that holding up and punching would let me do the face as opposed to the main body.
Yeah, that took me a little bit to get used to as well.
Yeah, and I actually like live streamed my first like hour or so with the game, and so you saw me on stream trying to fight King Hippo and not knowing what to do. I actually went out of it for a while into the kind of... There's like a training mode that you can do where you basically just non-stop go against them, and you can figure out like some of their moves and learn stuff before doing the title bout itself. I don't know why that's in there, aside from maybe you have like... I think because there's a record you have, right, in terms of how many matches you've won and lost. So if you keep doing the title bout, that record maybe you get changed or whatever. And, you know, there's no achievements on Wii or anything, so it's not like that's a big deal or something that I personally care about. But I guess it's there for people like that who want, you know, an opportunity to practice a whole bunch before doing the
Does it take the rounds out
run.
of it, and you're just fighting them the whole time?
Yeah, I think so.
Okay.
I only did it like that one time for King Hippo because I just couldn't figure out what I needed to do, because he's covering his belly the whole time, and you're like, well, I can't hit. And then randomly, like, I think because I was just moving buttons around, sometimes I would get him and I would have no idea why. And then eventually I realized that holding up lets you punch up and get them in the face. And I was like, oh, that's the trick to this fight, and that's how you do it.
Did you manage to work out Bald Bull's weakness?
So his charging, you mean, when he kind of goes at you. So it's funny because if you have a history of knowing stuff about Punch-Out, then a lot of the stuff from the past is going to help you in terms of this game.
I know almost nothing.
Right, and so I had recently watched, so Giant Bomb were doing some more Punch-Out because Abby Russell was playing through it, and when they got to Bald Bull, that was one of the moves that he has, is that he just charges at you, and you need to get the right frame window in order to do the punch that like hits him in the belly, and then he just crumples over onto the ground. So I kind of knew about that, but it took me a while to get it, because the timing window, again, is very tough. Like, you have to be pretty specific on it.
Not to brag, but I managed to beat the entire game, get to title, get to credits, without looking at a guide once.
Wow,
I
that's very impressive.
Just like fight after fight, suss the weakness, build on that weakness, and then I got very lucky with Bald Bull, where I thought I'll just try punching him next time he charges. And I did it, and I got the timing. I was like, oh my god, wow, that was amazing. I can't. And then I managed to consistently get the timing, just because I think once you get timing the first time, it's almost like your muscle memory's already got it, and you can
And he kind of does have a tell as well, because he like snorts smoke out of his nostrils when he's about to go. And so again, like there's always that stuff. And I think overall the tells are not just, oh hey, I'm going to do this thing. It's always built into the personality of the fighter as well, whether it be that kind of snorting out the nostril, or with the Indian fighter whose name I can't remember, the Great Tiger maybe.
Yes, Great Tiger.
And his turban like flashes, like the gem in it like flashes to indicate. His last stage is definitely one of those I was like, oh my god, like his super move basically, where he like switches and there's like a clone of him and he's like moving backwards and forwards. Hard. Yeah, it took me a while to figure out what was happening and where I was supposed to punch, and when to dodge, and which one was going to disappear and which one was going to stay. So stuff like that was definitely tricky. But
what was your toughest fight Sandman, Mr. Sandman?
Probably that was the one that took definitely a lot of
that took me the
practice.
longest as well. Just the speed at which between the tell and the punch coming out was just so short.
Yes,
and he very much had this system of any punch coming from the left was immediate, or anyone from the right was like delayed, but then that on the second phase that swapped.
Yes.
And then, there was just like a number of things that he did that was just really tripping me up. And what's really impressive is that it's obviously he's designed to trip you up. It's like getting the timing and the tells, the design that goes into that to trip you up on purpose. Like, it's, the timing must be so intricate. Like, like real credit to the developers, because it's just the animation and forcing you to think in a way that is tougher than the last opponent, but not as hard as the next opponent, and like trying to work out. It's just really impressive how it all comes together. It's a lot more complicated than you might first think.
Yeah, definitely. That stuff is like why this game has so much polish, I think, is because they focused on just the fights and getting those exactly how they wanted them to be. Every single part of every fight it feels so well cooked. You know, the animation, the tells, the way that the characters' personalities are implemented into all of that, and how you have all these multiple ways of defeating them, whether it be with King Hippo is just like taking him out. Sometimes you can do it if you take them out 5 times total over the course of the round. I can't remember. Is it maybe Soda Popinski who it is, where you have to just get rid of his bottle as well? And then once you do that, then he can't drink from it anymore, and so he doesn't heal himself.
He might have been the one that there was a couple that I beat just by getting more punches over the 3 rounds, and then you're given, I don't know what it's called, but there's no knockouts involved. It's just, I mean, no total knockouts involved.
No total knockouts, yeah. Well, I think King Hippo is one of those. As soon as you knock him out once, he's just done.
Right.
Because once he falls over, he just can't get back up again. He's just like, I'm too large, I'm not going to get up anymore. So that was definitely one. And then, I think one of them in particular was you need to, if you get them down 5 times, then they are just done. So you could push it out to round 3, and if you just hung on long enough and you had got them down enough times, they would be out of it. So yeah, I think that those overall fights, I think my favorite fight, I don't know, I really enjoyed King Hippo, because just figuring that one out and realizing, I've been an idiot this whole time, and not punching upwards was really good. Great Tiger I liked a lot as well. And yeah, some of the other ones later on were really just difficult. They were just, and I think one of the things I noticed was, especially with Sandman at the end, is you could get through the first round without taking a hit, because you knew exactly what was coming. I'm like, okay, so he's going to do one of these from the right, then 3 of those from the left, then one from the right, then one from the left. And I had learned basically the pattern of the first round, so that you could get through it without having to think, and then focusing your effort on the subsequent rounds to know, like, okay, so in round 2, after he gets knocked out, he's always going to start with this move, which means I need to go this way, then he's going to go that way. So as well as having the tells, which are much shorter and much more difficult in that fight, there is a part of it which is just the memorization, and I still like doing that memorization. It's satisfying to overcome the challenge, and just knowing something inside out.
I thought it was incredible how quickly you could do it. The first round, you could really nail it. You could not take a single hit, and then it was incredible how quick it could go completely south if you miss a move, and then you miss another move, and then all of a sudden, like, you can get knocked out so quickly, especially by those World Circuit fighters. They just do so much damage with their hits. You can go from being in a really, really strong position to like total knockout so quickly. There were multiple times where I was just like, I missed that one punch in the first round. Now everything's out of sync, and now I'm just going to restart. Like, quick restart. You do a quick restart? I'd fight on always.
No, Bally, you've got to cut your losses. You've got to be like, no, this round I'm not going to make it, so I'm just going to go and try a different thing. But yeah, I mean, we've talked about the characterization, but I do think that they do a good job every time they introduce someone of, as you said, there's like a slideshow of kind of drawings.
Flavor text, but not text. Flavor pictures.
It gives you flavor of who they are. They're very bold kind of characteristics, and so the thing that I really liked actually was, in between rounds, there's always a little thing that they do, whether it be a line that they say at you, or, you know, a certain little animation. that gives you a sense of who they are without, having a long drawn out cutscene, for example. And I thought that was pretty effective. Did you ever realize that you could heal yourself in between rounds? Because that's something
No.
I knew that you could do from the original Punch-Out. Is so if you press, I think it's A or B together, or maybe minus, it's a button that you press during the kind of downtime when Doc Brown is like behind you.
Yeah.
Doc Brown will just take out a chocolate bar and just eat the chocolate bar, and then at the start of the next round you'll have like a bunch of health back.
Wow. I never knew that. How did
So
you
you
discover
beat
that?
the game without doing that at all.
Yeah, I beat the game without doing that once.
That's very impressive, because I think I needed it at that last fight. It's like, just give me my health back. I need to be in a good standing.
How did you work it out?
I mean, I think I knew it was a thing that probably existed, so I looked up how do you get health like in between rounds. So I just found it there.
Oh, right.
But you can also like just punch the air when they're knocked down. Did you try doing that?
No.
If you just randomly punch the air after you have done one knockdown, you just start gaining health back.
Oh, right. Yeah, I didn't do either of these things once.
Yeah, so as I said, like, there's actually a lot of depth to this game that it doesn't really tell you. Like, that is the thing. It never told me that I could do an upward punch, so I had to work that out for myself. And learning that you have to duck as well.
And the training mode doesn't teach you about the star punches or anything. It just teaches you that you can dodge and punch. That's basically it.
Right. I'm trying to think is there a part of the game that tutorializes you on the controls? Like, I'm sure there's a place that says this is the controls and this is how it works.
I don't think there is, because I think it is just that training mode, and it just says this is how you dodge, this is how you punch. I think that's literally it.
Okay.
But that's part of the game, I guess, is like working it out. And
right, there is like a joy of discovery in some senses, of being like, oh wow, I didn't realize that if you did this thing you would be able to kind of yeah, and like the ducking was the thing that I had to. That's always the one that is the most difficult, I think, because you do it not that often. Your regular dodges are always left and right, and you will be punching people in the face a lot. So you're using those three directions quite frequently throughout the game. It's only in certain fights where you have to duck. So like Bear Hugger, for example, where he tries to like grab you and hug you and crush you to death. You have to duck that one. Right. And you have to duck Super Macho Man when he does his swing. So there are definitely fights that you have to really use that ducking, but because you use it less often, it's one that I felt harder to pull off because it felt less natural to kind of, the muscle memory, I guess, that I had built throughout the rest of the game. Right. Were there any kind of like individual character animations or moments that you particularly enjoyed throughout the game?
I think Glass Joe says some very stereotypical French things, which I thought were quite funny. And I like how they always stick to their language. It's not like they don't just start speaking English because it's convenient. And that was surprising, because there's a lot of things that are said that I just did not understand, but it kind of was still fun.
That's one of the things that makes me feel better about enjoying the like blown out like stereotypical personalities is that one of the things that the Great Tiger says that was like, I was like, really, they did that? Is he every time you hit him and he gets surprised, he goes "Are?" And that is like a thing that people will say in Hindi when they are surprised, and it is very fitting because people in my family say it all the time. It's like a very colloquial thing. It's not a word really. It's just like it's like a huh, basically. It's like huh in Hindi, and the fact that was done shows that they definitely put a lot of care into the research behind this game to make sure that they were being accurate to the expressions that people were making and the exclamations that they were doing. So I really enjoyed the idea of that, and like every time that he was like, I was like, oh, this is good. I really enjoy this. This is just like very real to me in a way that that was working. So that was probably one of my favorites for sure.
Nice.
But yeah, like there are just so many great characters, and the way that they're I just think that the presentation is above and beyond for a game like this, right? Because you don't expect them to put that much care and attention into a thing which is just like one-on-one fights, but it really paid off, and that's why it is so polished, is because they gave the focus to it, and were able to just really double down.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, yeah, we also have some emails about Punch-Out. So should we go to those, Bally?
Yeah, sure. Shall I go for the first one?
Yes.
So it's from Chris B, who sent us an email from the internet. Guys, a few days ago, I listened to the podcast where you announced your latest Backlog Club game as Punch-Out for the Wii. I was really happy to hear about that, although a little confused that neither of you had beaten it before. Gonna show my hand here and say that I think it's one of the best games on the Wii. I should probably mention that this is a bit of a cheat for me since I originally beat Punch-Out Wii around 5 years ago, but I've played it a few times since, so my memory is still somewhat fresh. Overall, the characterization of the fighters in this game gives it so much personality, with my personal favorites being Soda Popinski and Super Macho Man. Although it's still a bit disappointing that there was no British or Scottish representative in the Wii version, I recall reading that one of the previous games in the series had a British fighter called Narcissus Prince, a pun on the word narcissist. The closest we have is the Irish fighter Aaron Ryan, but it would have been cool to see Prince return too. With regards to the gameplay, the thing that sticks in my mind the most is the fact that every opponent has some sort of tell on when you should strike for the most damage. Whether it's Piston Hondo's eyebrow noise or Don Flamenco's Carmen Mi Amor.
Oh, that one, I just really, every time I was like, oh, yep, now I know where it's coming from.
Yeah, exactly. The fact that each character has something so memorable that you can come back to the game for the first time in months and still have an idea of how to fight each foe is a real credit to the game's design. I have to mention the fact that although this may not immediately strike people as a speedrun game, the community has optimized each fight to the point that it's very entertaining to watch. I recall really enjoying watching it done at Games Done Quick event. And them shouting out the French, German, and Spanish restreams of the event when reaching their respective fighters was really funny. I'd recommend looking for that if you haven't already. I anticipate that one of your complaints with the game will be a lack of English subtitles in the match intermissions, where the opponents speak in a myriad of languages. That was a strange omission by the devs, but there are videos on YouTube whereby people have translated them, so they're quite insightful for the curious. My biggest complaints personally are the relatively small roster of opponents, the insane difficulty of my favourite Tropical Freeze representative, shameless Tropical Freeze mention, and the fact that Doc Lewis mode wasn't included in this game as a training mode. The latter was a real missed opportunity. Lastly, the multiplayer is a fun one-off, but it is pretty much one and done experience with little replay value to it. The point of the game is learning fighting patterns and landing in a rhythm, which isn't possible when both players are punching and blocking at random. Kinda loses the whole point of the wider game as a whole. With that said, I appreciate the attempt of putting it in there. Anyways, that's probably enough for now. I'm writing this pre-E3, so looking forward to your coverage of the event. Until next time, gents, Chris.
Thank you, Chris. Hopefully you did enjoy our E3 stuff. I was going to ask you, Bally, if you did try the multiplayer at all with Caroline and see
No,
how
I didn't. I didn't bother. And thinking about it, Chris's point sounds like it makes sense completely.
Totally,
the whole game is designed around tells and waiting for your opponent to make a move. That just would go completely out the window. I imagine the multiplayer probably feels a bit more akin to Wii Sports Boxing than it would to anything Punch-Out related. But yeah,
Definitely.
No, I didn't try it, but could maybe give it a go.
Yeah, it does seem weird. It feels out of place. I like what he was saying there about rhythm, though, because I didn't mention it before, but when I was talking about how people could play it blindfolded, it reminded me of what you were saying when you played Rhythm Heaven Megamix, and how that game is all about sound and noise and not necessarily the visuals, right? Because Punch-Out is kind of a rhythm game. You know, it's a boss fight game, it's a rhythm game, it's a tactics game to some extent. Like it's a lot of these weird elements strung together, and I think that's a very apt description of it. It's like, yes, there is a certain rhythm to the way that the characters speak and to the moves that they pull out. So you really have to be prepared and and in the zone. It's also one of those games that I think part of your brain can be focused on it while another part of your brain can be like listening to something else, because it is, there are certain games that I can't play while listening to podcasts, whereas this one I could do quite easily because you just were in a certain zone with it,
right?
And it kind of worked in that sense. We didn't talk too much about Soda Popinski, but I did think that he had one of the more unique mechanics in the game with the bottle that he was drinking, basically healing himself, and you had to get a very tight window in order to punch it out of his hand, and figuring that out was pretty fun. I enjoyed that quite a bit.
We've not mentioned DK.
No.
Who
Yes.
I'd heard a long time ago, like, rumored to be in this game, and I didn't fully know whether that was just something made up that I'd heard or whether it was from another Punch-Out game. But yeah, I checked out like some of his fights on YouTube once I'd beaten the game, partly
because you don't get to him until you've gone through all of the title bout, and then you have to go through the third section as well.
I played quite a lot in a short space of time near the end of this game, so by the time that I'd beaten the game and seen credits and the title bout came, I kind of had burned out a bit on the formula of like going back to who's the first fighter,
Glass Joe,
exactly, and then he's got like a head guard now and everything's much harder. I was like, I'm not going to beat all these fighters to get to DK, and I'm certainly not going to do it anytime soon. Yeah,
I think the game actually is pitched perfectly in terms of difficulty for the regular playthrough. And then if you really want to do the title bout, which is definitely far harder, it seems, like going by Glass Joe at the start, who I had quite a few attempts at, and I was like, oh boy, this is going to... If I beat him, I'm going to have even harder fights after this, so it's going to be pretty rough.
No way I'm getting to DK anytime soon. But watching his fight online, I was like, the timing and the speed at which DK attacks is beyond belief. Like, it's so fast, and he does so much damage. Like, it does look like he's animated so well, and I'm really impressed by how DK looks. It's just... I'm not going to get there myself, unfortunately.
No, I think he is the Mike Tyson of this game.
Right.
It's just like the secret kind of character that is... Well, Mike Tyson wasn't really secret because it was called Mike Tyson's Punch-Out.
I mean, it's really cool that DK's in the game. Like, that's a good reference.
It definitely, and I think Next Level did well to like throw something in there that was a nice little thing for the fans, and I appreciate that, because it wasn't Mario the referee in the original Punch-Out.
Yeah,
I think that was the case. So there you go, the crossover between the universes here. Like, Little Mac is secretly actually a Mario universe character. That's probably how it goes. So then we have another email. This is from Discord, from Acerbis, who says, the satisfaction of knocking out a foe with a clever strategy while your punches do significantly less damage than theirs is carried over from the original games, but the design and traits of the opponents to make this challenging are successfully modernized with much less bullshit that I encountered in Super Punch-Out. Also, the controls feel incredibly tight and responsive, another hallmark of the originals. The most interesting aspect of the game for me was the structure, specifically the restraint Next Level showed in the game only being fight after fight. I think of Cuphead and how the public reaction to a game entirely of boss fights resulted in platforming levels that post-release some people thought the game could do without. I can envision a world where Next Level, tasked with reimagining Punch-Out, feel the need to add weak gameplay to the training montages or something like that, which would undoubtedly make for a worse game. I would love to hear your thoughts on the future of the franchise. Do you think that Punch-Out could work as a single Joy-Con game? What about a mobile game? I personally think the structure of the game lends itself well to mobile. One fight takes no more than 3 minutes, while from start to finish defeating a fighter takes about the length of a medium to long commute. Also, a touch-based control scheme could really lend itself well to Punch-Out. So yeah, some really good ideas there. Again, like the idea of Cuphead. I was one of those people with Cuphead who was like, no, don't add platforming levels, you idiots. This is clearly not what that game is. And they did them anyway.
I remember even playing at Gamescom in 2016, and we played like a boss fight and a platforming level, and the boss fight was just so much better than the
miles
platforming.
Better. But yeah, how do we feel about the future of Punch-Out as a series?
The biggest issue that we've already mentioned a bit is, what did they do about the stereotypes? So do they just they don't double down. They just go for it and say this is what the game is. Like I feel like this game would be lacking a lot without those stereotypes. But you do wonder if you can make characters with a lot of personality without having to rely on that stuff. Yeah,
I think the reason it works is just because they are so, over the top. Like it's hyperbolic to a degree. And I don't know that. I don't know. The way that you would do it would be hyperbolic in a different way, because you can't really do that again, potentially.
One route they could go down if they wanted to get rid of all the stereotypes is to smashify it, and like they have DK, just start introducing other Nintendo characters. I mean, that would that'd be cool, but still part that's what Smash Brothers is for, Like we can do that slightly differently elsewhere. It'd be nice to, I don't know, keep up those characters from different parts of the world and things. I don't know.
Yeah, that's definitely something to think about. In terms of it being a one Joy-Con game, it can absolutely work doing that.
Yeah.
I feel like, again, they would maybe want to try and push a multiplayer angle with that, because when you're talking about single Joy-Con, it's usually in the context of one person has one person has the other. And so that feels a little weird when we are saying that the whole core of the game is not going to be represented in the multiplayer, unless they reworked the multiplayer to be a more tactical. You have like a set number of moves, and maybe one person is playing a boss character and one person is playing Little Mac. But again, that seems like they don't have too much agency. It's not a game that I think is the same experience multiplayer. You could do it, but I think it would be weird. The mobile game idea kind of makes sense it's because previously Chair, so the people who made Shadow Complex, they made a game called Infinity Blade, which was huge on iOS, like one of the first like mobile games on Apple that was a massive success. And that game is basically Punch-Out, because you are going boss fight to boss fight and you're using the touchscreen to like slash in certain directions and fight a variety of enemies. And Punch-Out could work in that sense, but you wouldn't need to do like slicing across the screen, because you could just like tap one side of the screen to punch left, tap one to punch right. You wouldn't even maybe need to do, ducking or punching upwards, because that may add a layer that's a bit too complicated for a touchscreen interface. But on a basic level, it could potentially work. Although I don't know if there's a good way to monetize that at all. And you look at the way Nintendo's mobile efforts have gone, the most successful ones are the ones that follow the scummy microtransaction model, like Fire Emblem Heroes. Whereas things that don't, that are just like, hey, it's a one-off payment for Mario Run, hasn't really done that. And I think Punch-Out is not one of those games where you could really make it scummy. It would have to probably be like, hey, there's this cool little game that you paid a couple pounds or dollars for. So yeah, I think they could make it into a mobile game. I just don't think on a business end it would be something they would do. But yeah,
it's a really unique franchise, and like I think there obviously is a chance of it coming to Switch at some point. 9 years since the last one. I mean, I think the gap between Super Punch-Out and Punch-Out Wii was quite a big gap as well. So
yeah, pretty massive.
Maybe they might be going for another gap. Who knows? And yeah, we don't know what next level are working on. There's always a chance they could be doing a sequel. Who knows?
Yeah, that would be really good. I think a new Punch-Out on Switch would be a fantastic thing to do. But let's hope that they don't feel the need to add a whole bunch of extra stuff. I think that they could do well by sticking to their guns and being like, no, this is just straight fight through. The one thing I would say is, in terms of like dealing with the stereotypes and all that stuff, just start anew. Like, do the thing that people have wanted Pokemon to do for a while, which is like shed everything, get rid of all these characters, start off with new characters, because even people like me who hadn't played a lot of original Punch-Out, I know that Bald Bull charges at you and you punch him to, take him down.
Yeah.
And it's neat and it's different, and the fight has a lot of different elements to it, but it's kind of remaking that original game to some extent. Like, each Punch-Out game feels like just the next evolution of remaking the first Punch-Out game. And so it's kind of like Star Fox in a sense. It's like they keep going back to this original idea, and the idea is really good, and that's why it still kind of succeeds. But there is maybe value in blowing it up a little bit and adding some different ideas. I know you could maybe throw arms in there. What if they had arms fighters as part of Punch-Out? Because I think they've done a really good job of characterizing all these new characters in arms, and none of them feel like that. None of them feel compromised in the same way.
Yeah, no, definitely.
So there's a possibility that they can do that for sure. So. Yeah, any last thoughts, any things that you wanted to mention that we haven't talked about yet?
Just I'm kind of keen to go back and try out Super Punch-Out now. I know that it probably won't hold up as well as this game, but I'm now keen to give that a go. And
that's on the Super Nintendo Classic.
Yeah,
isn't it?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So I'm glad I finally tried out this series, and it is a little surprising neither of us had played this until now. So it was definitely a good one to do for our 5th Backlog Club. So thanks to our patrons for voting for that game.
Yes, absolutely.
And yeah, I think that it was a pleasant surprise and makes me want to do a few more Backlog Clubs.
Definitely. Expanding our knowledge of Nintendo IP overall. I really loved the game. I thought it was so much fun to just break down a boss and slowly chip away and get better and better and better until you're at the point where you feel so confident that you are dodging every single move and taking them down without even thinking about it. And that's a great satisfaction. It's a unique thing about games, and I think this game does it better than a lot. So really, really enjoyed it. Very, very good. And I didn't have enough time because I wanted to go through and do the title bout, and I wanted to see all this extra stuff. So I may keep going back to it in the future to see some of that, but we'll have to see, because time is one of those resources that is ever dwindling, and it's hard to find it. But yeah, that is pretty much going to close us out for this episode. Thank you everyone for listening, and we have things to talk about. What are the things? Where can you find us? All that stuff. We're probably going to get back to emails next time, because we haven't done them just normal emails in a while. And I think we probably need some more. So if you want to send those emails along, you can send them to our email address, which Bally will tell you now. ThisNintendoLife@gmail.com. That is ThisNintendoLife@gmail.com. And also send us your other wishes for the next Backlog Club poll. We're going to eventually do a poll and do Backlog Club 6 at some point in the next few months. So if you have a game idea, a game that we've ideally not played before that people can access, then send in that suggestion or just post it in our Discord server. So make sure to get those in, and I guess we'll have a poll shortly. In a while. It'll be a while, I think. Yeah,
we need a little break.
while.
Octopath's just about to come out. We need to
yeah, absolutely.
we need to be careful.
For sure. You can find us in various places. You can find the podcast on Twitter. It's at TNL Podcast. That's got links to our Discord, to our YouTube, all the fun stuff. And you can find me on Twitter. I'm at LordNBZ. Bally, where can they find you?
I'm on Twitter at Ballyman91, BALLYMAN91. And also another point to mention on our YouTube channel. We have a playlist on our YouTube channel with all our previous 4 Backlog Club games. They are, of course, Final Fantasy VI, Earthbound, Zelda Minish Cap, and Metroid Zero Mission.
Yes, yeah. So if you want to find all the other discussions that we've had on individual games over the years, you can head over there and have a look. It's all in one convenient place for you. And yeah, that's pretty much it. You can find us in various places on the internet. We are on iTunes, we're on Stitcher. You can download us on most podcatchers out there.
And support us on Patreon.
Yes, of course.
We've got to shout out to our 2 $10 tier patrons. They are, of course,
Yes.
Atari Alex and my girlfriend Caroline. Thank you for your support. Yes, do send us more support for Patreon. We always appreciate it. We've got a show coming out in a week.
Yes, we do. So yes, thank you to all our patrons for helping support the show. It's very much appreciated. And I think that's pretty much it. Am I missing anything, Bally? Is this
I think we covered all our bases. I think we've cleared the decks. It's now time for Octopath Traveler.
It is. So yes, we'll be talking a bunch about that next time and really dig into it. But until then, thank you everyone for listening, and we'll see you in a couple of weeks' time with more This Nintendo Life. Goodbye, folks. The musical interlude used on today's episode was the main theme from Punch-Out! Copyright Nintendo 2009.